This is video 6 of a 6-part video series on reporting of workplace injuries, illnesses, and exposures. We're going to try to answer some common questions that come up about injury reporting. We've tried in the last 5 videos to introduce you to the process and to the paperwork that's involved. But undoubtedly, until an employee has been put in the position of having to navigate the system, questions are going to arise. We hope that this video will help. The first question we'd like to address is which forms are the most important? When you've suffered a workplace injury and you're handed a packet of forms, naturally you want to know which forms are the most important, which ones take priority, which ones have to be filled out first. There are 3 forms that take precedence when you've suffered a workplace injury or illness. The first form is the Employee Injury, Illness, and Exposure Report form. This is the department's form for documenting the injury, illness, or exposure and is located in SharePoint. This is generally one of the first forms that you will fill out. Let's review where to find it. In order to find the Employee Injury, Illness, and Exposure Report form, open SharePoint. Go to the Operations section, and you'll see a blue button labeled Work-Related Injury, Illness, or Exposure. Click on that button. There are 5 buttons that will appear. Each one is labeled to indicate a different kind of problem. Identify your problem, and click on that button. In this case, Injury, Medical Treatment, No Hospitalization. You'll see a synopsis of the policy direction, a visual flow chart to follow, and buttons leading to forms. Notice the bottom button is the Employee Injury, Illness, or Exposure Report form. You click on that button, and the document appears. Save this document to your desktop by clicking File, Save As, click Desktop, and Save. A copy of the report form will now appear on your desktop. Simply open it, fill out the form, and forward it to your battalion chief or the operations analyst. It can also be printed, filled out legibly by hand, and then delivered in person to the BC or the operations analyst, or a scanned image or a picture of the form can be sent to the BC or the operations analyst. The other 2 very important forms in the early stages of a workplace injury or illness are in the packet that you will receive from the battalion chief or the operations analyst. Remember, the BC or the operations analyst are the only acceptable sources for a packet of forms after a workplace injury or illness. Forms found in any other location are not the correct forms and will cause you difficulty. The 2 forms in that packet that are going to be most important to you in the early stages of your injury or illness are the Self-Insurer Accident Report form, or the SIF2, and the Medical Certification form. Remember from our earlier video that this is one of the 2 forms that are used to open your workers' compensation claim. The information on the form is very important for determining when your benefits begin and what your payment will be. This will generally be the second form that you fill out. In some situations, if you go directly to the hospital and don't have an opportunity to fill out the employee report form, this might be the first form that you fill out while you're at the hospital. The third important form is also in the packet that you'll receive from the battalion chief or the operations analyst, and that's the medical certification form. This is the form that, in conjunction with the SIF2, is used to open your workers' compensation claim. This form is filled out by the physician in conjunction with the job analysis that's also in the packet, and you'll provide it to the doctor along with this form. Remember, this form is used for certification of your time off if you can't work. It's used to certify your ability to work light duty if that situation arises, and it's used to certify your ability to return to full duty. So to summarize the first answer, early on in the process of your workplace injury, illness, or exposure, the 3 most important forms will be the Employee Report form, the SIF2, and the Medical Certification form, which is filled out using the job analysis by the physician. Another common question that comes up has to do with the Medical Certification form, so we'll deal with that question right now. Do I need to take this Medical Certification form to my medical professional every time I have an appointment and have him fill it out? And the answer is no. The first time this form will be filled out is early in your injury, illness, or exposure. The medical professional will be identifying whether your injury is so severe that you can't work, in which case they would fill out Section 1 using the job analysis, or they'll determine that you're able to work light duty, in which case they'll fill out Section 2 using the job analysis. Or they may determine that your injury is minor and that you're able to return to full duty with no restrictions, in which case they would fill out Section 3 using the job analysis form. As your injury progresses, any time you're changing status, if you're off because you're so severely injured that you can't work, and you've improved to the point where you can work light duty, then your medical professional would have to fill out Section 2 to certify that you're able to work light duty and list any restrictions for that light duty. If you're off because you're so injured you can't work, or you're on light duty and you've improved to the point where you can return to full duty, then your physician has to fill out Section 3 using the job analysis form, releasing you for full duty. But any time you have a regularly scheduled appointment with your medical professional, even if you're not moving from one category to another, the medical professional and you, the employee, are required to provide the organization updated medical notes on your status. This form is not used for that. This form is used if you're moving from one section to another between off work, light duty, and full duty. A third common question that comes up has to do with Telus Staff. How do I manage the Telus Staff codes when I'm off sick? That's a good question. If you leave work because of an on-duty injury, illness, or exposure, the battalion chief or the operations analyst will enter the correct code for the day that you left work. But after that first day, employees are responsible for entering the correct code into Telus Staff, which begs a second question. How do I know which code to put into Telus Staff? If an individual isn't sure which code to use, ask the operations analyst. The proper code will be provided, and then you can enter it. Telus Staff is used to calculate payroll, so proper coding in this program is important. The last question that we often hear is, how am I supposed to know which of the many forms and checklists I'm supposed to fill out if I have a workplace injury, illness, or exposure? There are so many of them. I just need to know where to go and what to do. This is a very complex subject with a lot of permutations. There are many different things that can occur to a firefighter in the performance of their duty. Anytime you're opening a workers' compensation claim and working with labor and industries, the reporting requirements are quite detailed, so the forms can be a little intimidating. Also, depending on what's occurred, there may be other reporting requirements, such as for a biological exposure. An attempt was made to make this process as simple and as intuitive as possible. Let's review quickly how to access the correct forms and checklists. Open SharePoint, click on the Operations button, click on the button that says Work-Related Injury, Illness, or Exposure, and identify which of the 5 buttons applies to your situation. Looking at the first button, Record Only, you have a synopsis of the policy direction, a visual flowchart for your reference, and 2 buttons which will provide you the necessary forms and attachments. If you have a question, the very first thing you always do if you have an injury, illness, or exposure is notify your supervisor. The supervisor will notify the battalion chief, and the battalion chiefs are thoroughly familiar with this process. One last question that often arises has to do with workers' compensation benefits. What do I do if I receive a bill from a medical professional, an ambulance service, or a laboratory for my on-the-job injury? If you receive a bill, contact the city's workers' compensation coordinator in Human Resources. They can help you work with the city's third-party administrator, Gallagher Bassett, to make sure that the bill is paid. If you have additional concerns about the situation, contact the department's operations analyst. The analyst works with Human Resources to process workers' compensation claims. One final thing to remember as we conclude our training. Injury, illness, and exposure reporting, workers' compensation benefits, and the process of navigating the certification required to return to full duty can be daunting. But employees cannot take a passive role in that process. Employees need to know and understand what's expected of them, and they need to take an active role in making sure that the paperwork is filled out properly. If at any point you find yourself in a situation where you need a refresher on the forms or the process, just review the appropriate video and it will give you the necessary guidance. This concludes video 6.